Good afternoon, friends and colleagues. I wish I can say it like Vidya Balan does in Munna Bhai. I can't. So good afternoon to all of you. That's the best I can do. What I'm going to talk about today is not what we should do and why we should do. I think we heard a lot about that already. What I'm going to try to do is talk about the larger context, and given the larger context, how all of us can cooperate with each other to achieve what we need to achieve, what has been already laid out very well so far during the day. And essentially that is what IESA is about, right? I mean, we are an association of the companies that is trying to make in India, for the world, all those sort of good things. So before I lay out the larger context, and the setting of the context is like being blind and trying to describe an elephant, right? This is even more complicated because the context we are trying to set is of historical importance and of the global reach. But my perspective, so I'll try to explain it from my sort of perspective. And my perspective comes from my trying to make Sankalp sustainable and scalable over last several years. So I'll talk a little bit about Sankalp first. So Sankalp has global locations, multiple locations in India where we do the delivery of the work we do. But we have global centers where we try to take care of actually customer sort of concerns and issues. So in that way, Sankalp, when we say make in India for the world, I would rather change the word make to do. So Sankalp does things in India for the world. So what exactly do we do, right? So what we do is essentially semiconductor chip design services. And the way we see it, that it is a layered approach. So today Sankalp is able to do all your chip design services, and ISA is full of semiconductor companies, so I'm sure I don't have to explain this too much. But in short, we do digital services, analog services, front-end services, back-end services. We do on-chip services as well as off-chip services. Now, when you start doing something, you want to make sure that you do it in a way that will guarantee the sustainability and scalability that I talked about earlier. So from the time that Sankalp started, which was about 10 years ago, Vivek, who is here, he started it. The focus was what we call TIE, but basically trust, integrity, and excellence. So there has always been focus on do as best as we can on those three vectors. And then customer first, so obviously we are here to solve actually customers' problem, but grounds up, right? I mean, we don't want to take shortcuts, we don't want to solve the problems of the day and then run away. We want to do it grounds up. What do I mean by grounds up? So, although earlier somebody talked about that skilled engineering-wise, India has done well. I think there are still challenges in the semiconductor portion of the design and manufacturing. So there we still have to build talent. And Sankalp prides itself in developing homegrown talent instead of just trying to get engineers from some other company and survive on the basis of that. We also have multiple design centers in India, and that goes hand in hand with the first point that I mentioned. If you want to train people, you want to be close with the engineering colleges and also ideally give them jobs there. I mean, I think Bangalore is crowded enough, right? Operational excellence I already talked about. And all these leads to the buzzword that also I think Vivek threw around, which was actually customer delight. So that's how we do things at Sankalp. Where have we been now that we have 10 years old? I would say that we have done well. Generally, we have been doing about 3x in revenue every 3 years. And more importantly, if you look at the last 3-4 years, in 2012, we were fortunate to have an opportunity to have cooperation or the merger with KPIT Semiconductor Services Unit. And this is one of the examples of the cooperation that I'll talk more about later. And just few days ago, we announced that we have done the similar thing with Intera systems. And with some of the other things we have done in the last year, I'm very confident that for several more years, we should be able to keep this trend of 3x in 3 years kind of actually going. So that is for as far as the Sankalp. Now, if I talk a little bit about myself so that you understand where do I come from, at the risk of giving away my age, I would like to say that, I look at my life in the last 4 decades as very formative years. So the first decade, when I was, from sort of teens to mid-20s, I was a very driven student, which took me to some of the top institutes in the world, and I think of that as being very fortunate. Then I worked with IC companies, system companies, and IP companies, mostly as an engineer or engineering lead and things like that. I think the most important change that I made in my career was after those first 2 decades, where I was first made responsible for making sure that actually customer systems do not have any obstacles or hindrance because of adoption of Rambus technology. And that's where I started to unlearn some of the things that I had learned earlier. I think we all are inherently very competitive. And I had to go from competition model to cooperation model. And the last decade brought me closer back to home, because otherwise, until then I was in the Bay Area. I'm still in the Bay Area. But in 2005, I had an opportunity to come work in Bangalore. And since then, mostly due to Sankalp, I've been working in India more than I should say outside India. Especially if you count all the time you spend on the phone across the oceans. So that is where I come from. And now what I'll try to do is set the context, the larger, broader context from my viewpoint. A lot of people have talked about the opportunity we have in front of us to transform India to the next level of economic growth. If you put it in perspective, in an historical perspective, I think the opportunity is even larger. We have an opportunity to take part into transforming the world from information age to intelligence or knowledge age, right? So we just had an automotive panel, so I'll use that example. In the agricultural society, we were using some vehicles like bullock cart or whatever, but they were not powered. They were not actually machine powered. They were man or animal powered, right? Then we came to the industrial age, and we talked about automotive a lot. We have car, but today, if you look at, there are all kinds of battery operated, electricity operated, gas operated tools and things. But sticking to the car, you go from bullock cart to bus or a automobile. Then comes again going back to the panel, what they said, intelligent driver and stuff like that. So now we are giving him a lot of information. So information and industrial output, industrial products are now being merged. But what is going to happen now in the next transformation is that we are going to add intelligence to the tools, the gadgets, the vehicles themselves. So somebody asked earlier the question, when can we see driverless or the self-driving cars? My gut feel is that at least in the Bay Area, you will see them being bought by people like you and me in the next 5 to 10 years. Google is already driving them, and it is gathering massive data. And all the problems of accident and would you risk, would you see enough value? Of course not. I'm not going to put my kids in a self-driving car and say, okay, Tata, go to school. But I don't have any problem Google giving me free delivery at home from Costco or Target in a self-driving car. Who cares, right? And somewhere, somehow the market has to start, and I think the time has come. It will happen. But that one example tells you how we are transforming the world. So world is transforming and we have an opportunity to be part of it. This also has been talked about a lot, the number of devices, right? So I'll not spend too much time on this, but we all kind of see this coming. I don't think, maybe I was not paying attention, but upcoming trend being hyped as much as what IoT has been hyped right now. And I think it is for real though. But the point I would like to really make is that it's a variety explosion. And this is from the perspective of a chip maker, right? So far what has happened is you can have millions of cell phones, hundreds of millions of cell phones, maybe tens of millions of tablets, but they're not very different from each other. Yes, Google and Apple can fight over whose operating system is better, and if you are not technology savvy, you can vehemently argue that iPhone is better than Android phone. But for most of us geeks, they are not very different from each other. I can switch from one to other any day, right? What is going to happen now? What type of chips the world needs going forward? It's not going to be one chip with 100 million units or one chip with 10 million units. It will be multiple chips, thousands, 10,000 chips in volumes as small as 10,000 or 100,000 units. Obviously, it depends on the ASP of the price. But what we tell our actually customers, these are the system customers, that if your electronic spend is few $1 million, let's say between $1 and $10 million, you should start thinking about making a chip, right? Why? Because it will be necessity. You will have to be able to make the chip because off-the-shelf parts will not be available that are right for your application. But also it's an opportunity. If you can do a chip according to your features, your specifications, then you will have an advantage in the market. What drives this variety explosion? So obviously the applications, right? I mean, whatever else we say, ultimately if there is no necessity, if there is no need, if people of the world don't want certain things, then you're not going to be able to make an economic proposition that is viable. So explosion is driven in variety by obviously the need or the like appetite of like people for all these gadgets. But, and you know, industry tries to cope with it. So we try to streamline things, we try to standardize things. So even if we try to form alliances, even if we have standards, you will see there are multiple of standards. What I've tried to put on the slide here is just for the wireless, there are so many alliances for wireless interface, and there are so many standards. So there will not be one standard, there will be multiple standards. And then on the top of that, you know, we talked about hardware, and somebody asked about fab in India. But there is no one fab. I mean, you know, today more chips are being made in 35 microns, 3.5 microns, sorry, which was the technology they were using in 1983 when I started working, right? Then they are made in 16 nanometer. So the whole actually plethora of process nodes offered by many, many different competitive foundries is available. And for a person who wants to build his system or a chip, he will pick the right one. And it will be market driven, it will be economics driven, right? So if you want to do a fab in India, which one to do? Which node to actually focus first? There are lots of, I mean, they answered it very well. It's a very complicated sort of actually question to answer. But for my purpose here, these are the things that drive variety. And variety is the life, I mean, is the essence of life, right? Because what is going to happen if ultimately if we are all free and if we are if we all can afford, then we want something unique. We want something that kind of reflects our unique identity or our likes, our actually dislikes. That's what Apple has done so well, right? There is a humorous quote about